I am here to share a recap of my experience at the 2023 Headache on the Hill advocacy event. This is my third time advocating with Headache on the Hill. It is organized by the amazing organization, the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. A bit of a mouthful, but it's an umbrella organization that unites advocates from all over the United States and brings them all together for a day-ish of concentrated advocacy with our members of Congress. So if you are just joining me, I am Adrienne DeLorco. I am the founder and creator of Yoga for Migraine, and Headache on the Hill is my opportunity to give back to the migraine community, to help advocate for better legislation for headache and migraine research, laws. So I'll share today what we were asking Congress for this year, what it's like talking to Congress, who we talk to, how to become a Headache on the Hill advocate, and what it's like advocating for migraine while living with migraine. I initially was meant to share this live talk with you guys 2 weeks ago, right after the event. We held Headache on the Hill was held on February 14th on Valentine's Day, but like many people living with migraine, I had quite a wallop of a migraine attack the next day, and that is the challenging part of being an advocate, a migraine advocate, is the advocacy can take a lot out of us, especially for people who traveled to DC to be in this event. So in my case, I've been participating virtually for the past 3 years. They've had a virtual option to talk via Zoom with members of Congress since COVID, and this year they're bringing back more people in person as well. And if you are interested in Headache on the Hill and how to join, I'll share more about what that looks like. And if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And great to hear if you're joining us live, show #live, and #replay. So this year, like every year, we have 3 asks of Congress. And each year it's slightly different depending on the focus and what's going on in our world. So this year, our 3 asks had to do with creating a headache caucus in the House, on creating clear language to help students with migraine to get IEPs. I'll go into all of this shortly. And finally, our 3rd ask was support for a bill to help with long COVID research and having more headache research and funding as part of that. So the way this all works before you show up for your day of advocacy online is there are trainings on the topics that we attend. I was our state captain for Idaho. So this was the first year that I participated where I was not the only person representing Idaho. If anyone's watching and you're in Idaho and you want to be a migraine advocate, we would love to have you. I had one other advocate from northern Idaho who was a physician's assistant who was able to join from Idaho. And then we also ended up linking arms with the representative or advocate from Kansas. So we attended meetings for Idaho and Kansas, and that's usually how it's been for me. I've attended meetings for 2 different states. Nobody advocates alone. You're always with a partner. And what I was in charge of was helping to organize, all the advocates for our meetings. And I introduced everybody in our meetings. I shared why we were there. We each share our migraine story, like about a minute, to talk about what my life has been like living with migraine. I share how migraine has affected my life from everything from my daily life. Do I go outside? What clothes I wear? What shampoo I use? What glasses I wear? To also bigger issues like how I had to leave a career as a public school teacher due to migraine, how I nearly didn't have my second daughter due to migraine. So they get a sense of, the immense impact that migraine has in people's lives. This year I only talked with aides from Congress. I've had a few times where the actual senator or congressperson attended the meeting, but in my experience, that's been rare. It's usually been a younger aide that's informed on the issues and comes and attends. So I was in charge of asking our representatives from Congress to support the creation of a headache caucus. So there's just, probably over 100 caucuses for the House of Representatives, which means it's like a focus group. So there's caucuses on everything, not just diseases, but multiple issues. And I was genuinely shocked seeing the list of caucuses for other diseases, everything from Lyme disease, lupus, arthritis, autism, many forms of cancer, brain injury, celiac disease. There's countless caucuses for many other disease states that affect far fewer people than migraine and headache, and often maybe don't even have as debilitating effects. So it definitely is. There is a need for a headache and migraine caucus, given the numbers of people and the debilitating effects. So I shared that in the US, migraine is the second leading cause of disability. Also, in just terms of sheer numbers of people affected, 17% of women, 6% of men in the US are affected by migraine. That's a huge percent compared to something like celiac disease, which has its own caucus and only has 1% of the population who is affected. So the need and disability are enormous. So we absolutely need a headache caucus, and that's what I was asking for anyone that I met with, if the congressperson would either lead a caucus or join. And hard to tell. I've got definitely a few interested in joining something like that, and I'm hoping that someone in Congress takes the lead to actually start and co-chair that. We also talked about the need for clear language for students who are dealing with debilitating migraine to qualify for an IEP. So this is special education services that technically migraine should be covered because individualized education plans, IEPs, cover some specific health conditions, and then they kind of have an umbrella health condition, other health conditions. And due to the debilitating nature of migraine for many students with migraine who are unable to even attend class, they're vomiting, they can't be in a classroom. The need is absolutely there, but it's just not specifically covered like other forms of health conditions. So we asked that there be a formal memo that would address clearly that migraine falls into a covered category for students with IEPs. And so we were asking for support, that if something like that were to go through, that we would have their support. And then finally, our third ask had to do with supporting a Care for Long COVID Act, which I should probably get this very specific name up for you guys. But it is a bill that's already going to be submitted again to Congress. And this was a bill to help support people living with long COVID. Yeah, the Care for Long COVID Act. Ooh, I got it right. And a headache is one of the most frequently mentioned symptoms of people living with long COVID. There are many people whose migraine and headache disorders were exacerbated after COVID, or people who got brand new headache and migraine conditions as a result of long COVID. So we were asking that they would co-sponsor this act when it's reintroduced, which should be shortly reintroduced, and specifically prioritize research on migraine and headache as it relates to long COVID. So these were our asks this year. As we asked, these meetings were about 15 minutes long. I always ask the person I'm talking to if they know anybody with migraine, so they have this personal connection, and typically most people do, and oh yeah, I knew this person and they were quite debilitated, so they see that impact and they understand why greater funding and legislation and protections, especially for students living with migraine, are needed. And then after the meeting, we take a little picture of everybody. We submit, some results of what happened in the meeting. In the meetings I've been in, it's really hard to tell, like, in that meeting, did we make it? Are they going to start or join something? That does take a lot of follow-up. And Julian Verity, who is directing the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy, really said this is a long game approach. And every year we show up and we're just trying to move the needle bit by bit for better legislation to support people living with migraine and to really share the immense burden, this, like, we call it a disease burden, like relative to other disease states. There are so many of us living with migraine and the effects are so debilitating, and yet the research funding legislation are just so minimal in comparison with the disease burden of how many people are dealing with this. So the day of talks, oh gosh, I think I might have attended maybe 5 or 6 talks, meetings that day, and I even had an extra one that got rescheduled last week. So between advocating for 2 different states, it gets easier every time you do these meetings, and it gets a little less nerve-wracking, but there's still, this is my 3rd year, and it still feels like a little bit of pressure. And I think for many people, having to be on, wanting to say things well and explain things, it is stressful. And so for many of us, our migraine symptoms did increase, the next day, or people still showed up advocating, with their ice packs and dealing with a migraine attack. So it can be quite a selfless endeavor for many people, especially living with more chronic or intense forms of migraine, that they are really fighting for migraine. They're fighting for themselves, even when in the short term they might feel an increase in symptoms. And I know for me that was the case as well. So for folks interested in participating in Headache on the Hill, I'll drop a link with the information so you can join. Especially at this year was, I think, the biggest cohort we've had yet, which is great. And we were able to get advocates from every single state, which I think might have been a first, or at least the first time in a long time. So for folks, especially those of you in smaller states, less populated states like mine of Idaho, we are definitely looking for folks to represent. I would love to have more people from Idaho. I know our advocate from Kansas was the sole advocate, and to have more representation from people in states, because the more cities, even in one state that we represent, that means more House representatives we can talk to start to make a difference. And it's a one-day event typically of showing up for meetings, but it takes some prep work to get there. And as a result, though, you learn so much more about the legislative process, about how government functions. It helps you it feels empowering to really participate in our democracy in this way, where we're talking with our congresspeople. You learn much more about migraine, and you're doing this as this way to give back to the migraine community, which is so valuable. There's a lot of us out there, and getting our voices heard is a big deal internally for ourselves, and also helping to make changes on a grander scale. So I definitely recommend participating and just going in knowing that you do need to make some time for it. You need to make some space. And now I know my lesson. The day after, give yourself space to recover and heal. And if you have questions about what it's like, what's involved, absolutely reach out and help. I always say you come first. Like, your health comes first. And so if you're at a place in migraine where you're able to give back and your migraine is more stable, or you just know like doing something like this is going to help you feel like you're doing something. Because often with migraine, we can feel like we are helpless and not helping anybody else. And this really does make a difference and really helps to unite and like be a community with nearly 300 other advocates from across the country, and to really impact migraine in the national conversation, in government. Like, that's an amazing opportunity. And I think this year the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy did one of the best jobs I've seen yet of just organizing all these people, organizing the issues, making it really clear what to say, and how the meetings work. So you'll be fully prepared, and you'll always be, if you're new, partnered with someone who's done this before, who can guide you. So thank you so much for listening to my recap. And in my last video, I shared, other do's and don'ts of migraine advocacy. This is just one kind, but there's everything from just writing an email here and there to sharing your experience on social to participating in fundraising events, volunteering with migraine organizations. You come first, and feeling connected and united with other people living with migraine and feeling like you're making a difference is also good for your migraine disease. Having a purpose, giving your pain a purpose is very meaningful. So thanks so much for listening today, and we'll be back next week with some yoga. Lots of love, everyone. Bye-bye.